live from the Counterpunch Media mobile studios in Grand Blanc, Michigan. It's time for real lives, real families, real fitness. It's time for Derek Noel Fitness.
What is going on, everyone? Derek here from Derek Noel Fitness, and today we have episode 13, which is actually a two-parter from last week because I ran out of time last week. There's a lot more content that I thought I was going to be able to get to, but this time it's going to happen for real. We have the rest of the body to work with. Last week we were talking about shoulders, we talked about some arms, we talked about the chest, and really that's all I had time to get through. I get really into this stuff. If in case you missed it last week, I do recommend going back and checking that out. Don't worry, you're not missing out on anything. If you don't do it right now, this is also a self-contained episode. It's going to be really nice. So, in case you missed last week I had posted a question about what would people like me to make videos about, and someone posted a non-science-y way to explain how the muscles work and how to train them. Or specifically it was how to train them. I kind of tagged on how the muscles work because really it is a super important thing to be able to know how those muscles actually work and have a better understanding of how they work, because then you can train them more effectively. So for example, knowing that that bicep is responsible for actually bending your arm, you can think of it as, okay, I just need to bend my arm really tight or bend my arm under a load, and now all of a sudden my bicep is going to get stronger because it's going through that range of motion. Same deal goes for everything else. If your favorite body parts are your shoulders or your chest or your biceps or your triceps, we talked about the front of the arm and the back of the arm last week, you should definitely go check that out. And like I said, we're talking about the other muscle groups. We're talking about our backs today, which is going to take a little bit of time, and then we're talking about our legs today, which is also going to take quite a bit of time. I feel like it's actually a really good idea for me to only cover those two muscle groups today because they're such big muscles groups and big muscles that we definitely need to spend some time and understand how these things work so that we can understand how to train them a little bit more effectively. So, that being said, real quick, I wanted to give a thank you for everyone who is tuning in to watch this live, for everyone who is watching this later on, or even if you're listening to this in podcast form later on this week. Remember, you can always listen to the audio form of these, slightly edited just to take out some of the pauses that sometimes I have while I am communicating. Usually it's only like a minute or so of that, dead silence that I like to have sometimes. All that's taken out in podcast form, so it is just one fact after another, and it's a really nice way. Say if you're driving, if you have a nice long commute, it's a good way to burn right around 30 minutes listening to my lovely voice in your car, or something like that. Some way to make sure that you're still learning and you're not using that time just to, be jamming to some music. Not that jamming to music's bad, but I find that when I'm listening to an audiobook or a podcast while I'm driving, it actually really helps out a lot, and it helps me really focus on whatever I'm going to be doing when I get out of the car later. So, for example, I don't know, this is a little aside, but who knows, you might want to try this out. For example, if I'm going to the gym, then I'll listen to music because it really helps me get ramped up and hyped up. But if I'm driving to work or something like that, I'll listen to a podcast. That way I can get myself centered, and who knows, I might learn something that I want to share with all of my clients, and a lot of times that actually does happen. So it's a really nice little way to find some little knowledge bombs when you're least expecting it, or when you're just, driving around. So, let's get into this topic because I have a funny feeling I'm going to need all of the rest of this time to be able to talk about these things. I'm going to start back up where I left off last week. Last week I was about to talk about the back. And the back is a lot of people's favorites. Everyone thinks about a strong, sexy back. It's really nice. And it helps with everything you do in your body too. Actually, both your legs and your back really help out. By the way, in case you're thinking I might be leaving out the butt, that is, I'm including that in legs, so that will also be in the leg subject, so we'll definitely get to that. And if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned abs yet, I actually did an episode a few episodes ago talking specifically about how to train the abs. So definitely go back and check that out as well. The nice thing is these things are archived, so you can just check them out. So let us jump into the back. And I'm actually going to read the notes because I wrote this for myself. For the back, oh boy, take a seat. Here we go. The back contains some of the largest and most functionally important muscles in the body. Your back is involved with all of these arm movements that I'm doing, all stem from starting in the back. So keep that in mind when we're talking about these. Your back lets you stand up straight, it protects your spine, it helps you reach and pull, and it helps you extend your arms, everything. So what are the muscles involved in the back? We're going to be talking about these. I'm going to break them down individually because each one has its own little way of training it, and there will be some overlap here, and you'll find between back and legs there will actually be a little bit of overlap between both of them. Because, fun fact, they are a lot more related than you think. Same thing with the core. So, let's talk about Big Daddy Lat first. Your latissimus dorsi, your lats. They're the muscles that run from basically underneath your arm down almost into your hip. They help you pull and reach with your arms. So, all of these things really helps. So nice extended and nice and flexed. So from sideways, extended is your arms reached out, flexed is with your elbows behind you. So when we're talking about doing rows and things like that, we are hitting those lats. Really good way to train them is with a pull-up, because I'm pulling those elbows down and back, and again, think of good posture. So I talked about last week keeping your shoulders down and back when we're doing raises. You want to keep those shoulders down and back when we're hitting these rows or these pull downs as well, and you'll be able to get those down. You'll know you have a really good mind-to-muscle connection, which, by the way, we should all be striving for, when you can basically make your muscle cramp just by doing this. And there I go. Yeah, got to stretch that across now. So when you have that mind-to-muscle connection of being able to make that muscle cramp without any weight, you're going to become a lot more effective at training that muscle. So like I said, pull-ups are really good for the lats. Or if you don't quite have a pull-up yet, doing something like a lat pull-down or a straight arm pull-down. So again, keeping those shoulders down and back, just this motion here, pulling them down, is really going to help get those lats engaged. Rows, so doing things like seated rows or bent over rows are really going to help out. And another thing, when we're doing a lot of these movements, our grip strength really comes into play. I know I didn't really talk about the forearms all that much, but a lot of times when we're doing some exercises for our back or our legs, we have to hold on to a bar, and again, they're big muscles, so a lot of times we're going to be working with bigger weight than we might be used to, so we want to make sure that we treat our hands like hooks. You don't want to vice grip the crap out of the bar. You don't want to be squeezing your hands into fists, because that's going to make your forearms do a lot of work. That being said, if you're looking at building grip strength, maybe it is a good idea to make sure that you're holding on really tight, but just be aware that as you get more fatigued, your hands are going to be getting a lot more tired. You might not be able to move as much weight, which for the bigger muscles that we're talking about might kind of be required in order to spur some growth, especially if you've been doing this for a while. So again, hands are hooks, basically pull with your elbows. You're pulling down with your elbows, you're pulling back with your elbows, you're getting that back involved, and that's going to hit your lats. They're going to be involved to an extent with almost all of the back movements that you do, just because of what they're involved with, but we're going to move on to the next one. We're going to be talking about our traps or trapezius muscles. This is one where a lot of people think that their traps are basically this neck muscle. And by the way, if you're wondering why it's called a trapezius, it's because it makes basically like a trapezoid. It kind of has the same shape. There's another one related to that we'll get to in a bit. But your traps are more than just these neck muscles. You have your lower, your middle, and your upper traps. So the ones that people see on their neck, that's just the upper ones. You still have your middle and lower lats. What the traps do is they actually control your shoulder blades. So shifting them around. And again, there's some smaller muscles in there too, but basically moving everything around. Shrugging with your neck movement. You got some head support. My neck just cracked a little bit. Your traps are basically, they're a very big part of your back, down the central part of it, along with your the spinal erectors, which I'll talk about in just a second. But it's really important to make sure that you're hitting those middle and lower ones, because that can also lead to some back strain. Or, you don't want to have the Brock Lesnar or Goldberg kind of giant traps that basically look like you go up to your ears. For a lot of people, they're not looking for that aesthetic. If you are, then by all means, keep doing some shrugs. What exercises can you do for this? Shrugs are going to be really good. And when we're doing shrugs, I've seen some really weird things over my time being in the gym. But when you're doing a shrug, it's basically just like you're going, oh, okay. Or, I don't know. It's this movement. Just the shoulder up, neck is staying neutral. You're not worrying about crunching your neck down, which is one thing I've seen. I've seen a lot of people like squeeze the crap out of the neck and like shove their head forward because they think that that's going to get them more of a squeeze. All that's going to do is put a ton of tension in your neck. And there are a lot of people, especially chiropractors out there, who will tell you that's not good. And the other thing is people will start rolling their shoulders. So rolling the shoulder isn't really necessary to hit the traps anymore. The shrug is one of those movements. By the way, shrugs are also a great way to build grip strength. Or if you're not worried about grip strength, and again, I'll talk about this for a few exercises, maybe using straps might be the good idea, so your grip strength will be taken out of it, and you'll be able to more effectively concentrate that load on the muscle you're trying to work. A little bit more of an isolation tactic there, but not bad. Other ones, deadlifts. You're going to hear me say deadlifts a lot. The deadlift and the squat are considered the two kings of exercises. I personally love the deadlift just a little bit more than squats. I love them both. Anyone who's talked to me knows I love them both. I can basically advocate for almost everybody, keyword almost everybody, to do deadlifts to a certain extent. And I'm not saying you have to be picking up like 500 pounds with your deadlift, but it is a very, very effective movement of training everything. For your middle and lower traps, by the way, seated rows are going to hit them. So that's another compound one that we're going to be hitting our lats with a lot. And face pulls as well. Last week we talked about face pulls for the rear delts, which is a very underdeveloped muscle for a lot of people. So hitting those face pulls will help out just with general back health. They're one of my favorite middle and upper back exercises to do because it really helps strengthen those muscles in your shoulder blades. And you need that stability to be able to go places. The third muscle, which honestly is more of an accessory, is your spinal erectors. Honestly, they become stronger through other movements. They help stabilize the spine. As your trunk, so as your torso starts to get stronger, I'm talking abs, your transverse abdominis. Again, I talked about that one in a couple episodes ago, but that's the deep ab muscle that helps stabilize everything. As you get stronger, as you're picking up more weight, as you're squatting more weight in your core and your back, the rest of your back gets stronger, your spinal erectors get stronger. I definitely would not recommend trying to make this muscle stronger all by itself because, again, it's going to get stronger relative to what your body can handle. That's really all I have for erectors. That's a quick one. Rhomboids are another one. Rhomboid is also a shape, which is what it's named after. They help pull the shoulder blades together. Like I said, the traps control the shoulder blades. The rhomboids help pull things together. So they're going to be hit with the seated rows and things like that. They are an accessory for all of the other movements as well. Like I said, the back is a really compound system of muscles, so they all kind of help each other out. The last one I want to talk about is the teres major, which is considered the little lat. It's actually the one that a lot of people think their main latissimus dorsi, so their main lat goes all the way through. That teres major is actually what helps pull the arm down, and it's called that little lat. So you get kind of a good squeeze there. You definitely want to make sure that one is strong, but I found through working with people, a lot of people tend to have super shortened teres majors, which basically means that it's really tight already, and as we work out, our muscles get tighter. So it might be something we kind of want to treat with care when we're training. Yes, we want to maximize strength, but at the same time, we need to do it safely. And I'll talk about that again when I get into the legs. So, like I said, compound system. For the back, we have our lats, we have our traps, we have our erectors, our rhomboids, and teres major. We want to make sure that we do a series of vertical pulling, horizontal pulling, a lot of different pulling motions, some face pulls. really balanced system, really balanced. If you're writing a back workout and you hit one vertical pull, so a lat pull down or something like that, one horizontal pull like a seated row, some pull-ups, and some other things like some face pulls, you'll have a really, really effective back workout, and you won't have to spend 9 hours in the gym being able to do it. Before we get into legs, we are going to throw this to a quick break so I can get a sip of water.
You're listening to Derek Noel Fitness here on IPMNation.com/counterpunch. He'll bring the smarts. Now the sweat, well, that's up to you.
Who's ready to talk about some legs? I know I am. Legs are one of my favorite body parts to work out. Fun fact, they're also the largest muscles in the body. And if you think I'm joking, you'll be surprised. A lot of people... Real quick quiz, by the way. Before I get started talking about legs, I want you to post in the comments what muscle in your body you think is actually the biggest. I already gave you the hint. It's in your legs. Which one is it? It's your quadriceps, hamstrings, glutes, adductors, abductors. Let me know what you think it is, and we'll get to that answer very, very soon. So, largest muscles in the body, legs. Let's start out with the fronts of the legs. So we're looking at the front of your legs. If you're looking down, it's the ones you can see directly. Those are called your quadriceps. I talked again about last week the actual language for naming muscles. We have the ceps, quadri means 4, ceps, heads. So we have 4 muscles in the legs. Overall, the use is to extend the knee. So it's basically to straighten your leg out. When we're trying to build a firm base, we want to make sure that our knees are completely locked out, and just by doing that, if you try that at home right now as I'm saying that, you'll be able to get a nice tight squeeze just by trying to force your knees absolutely straight as far as you can go, like you're trying to almost bend your knee the other way. You'll get a really tight squeeze on those quadriceps. Those are the muscles we're talking about right now. There are 4 heads, like I said. I'm going to go over the names for them, but they all have basically the same function, which, like I said, is extending that leg. We have the rectus femoris, the vastus lateralis, the vastus medialis, and the vastus intermedius. Again, you really don't need to know that, but just so you know that there are 4, and they all make up of different ones. There's one that ties a little bit higher into the hip, but for the most part, right into that hip joint. They also deal with hip flexion. So remember hip extension, hip flexion. We're going to be talking about hip extension a lot when it comes to the leg stuff. Super important, and we'll get into that. So your quads, like I said, have to deal with that extension, and honestly, they are very overdeveloped compared to people's hamstrings, especially if you've played sports in the past. So if you're a college or a high school athlete who got out of working out for a really long time, and you tend to feel some pain in the tops of, like the very top part of your knees, that's where your quad kind of ties into your knee. That tendon, the quad tendon, typically can weaken over time. So simply building up that leg strength and being careful with it will help alleviate some of that pain, or maybe making the hamstrings a little bit stronger. Because, like I said, when we're working on our muscles, they get really tight, and if we have super underdeveloped hamstrings, which we'll get to in a second, but that's the back of your legs, those quads being super tight can start pulling weirdly on your knee, along with something called your IT band, and that can lead to a bunch of knee issues or perceived knee issues, which can be fixed by training. So again, talk to a physical therapist before you start trying to do corrective exercise things, because that is their specialty. If you know a physical therapist, talk to them about it, see what you can do, and if they tell you there's nothing you can do, figure out where you want to go from there, because there usually is. So, and again, this is where the carryover comes in. How do we train our quadriceps? Well, it's a pushing motion, so there are a few things we can do. We need to push the floor away, so squats are a really good option, or split squats are my personal favorite. Doing lunges, because that's standing up motion, or doing a leg press or a wall squat with like a stability ball or something like that, where you can lean back and focus more on that push up. That is all going to hit those quadriceps. Let's talk about the hamstrings now. Like I said, a lot of people are very quad dominant, so they have really overdeveloped quads in comparison to their hamstrings. Our hamstrings are in the back of our legs, and there's also 4 muscles in there, or 3 if you want to combine the long and short head. We have our biceps femoris. So in case you didn't know, you have a biceps in the back of your leg too, because the hamstrings are basically the bicep of your lower body. They deal with bending the knee. We also have our semitendinosus and our semimembranosus. Again, you don't need to know those names, just know that there are 4 muscles back there, and it deals with flexing the knee or bending that leg, basically. That's the main function of them. To an extent, they also deal with internal knee rotation, so bending your knees inwards, which honestly you don't want to do in a lot of situations, is bending those knees inwards, but you want to be able to do that. In external rotation a little bit, and then hip extension as well. It helps the glutes with that. You want to spend a little bit more time developing hamstrings than you do your quadriceps. Again, especially if you have been playing sports, especially running sports, for a long time. Your quads tend to build up a lot more than your hamstrings when you're doing that. Mainly because you're constantly pushing off the ground. And again, that pushing motion, quads. So what can you do to build strength in your hamstrings? By the way, number 1, you want to make sure that you warm up your hamstrings by going a little bit lighter on the load. Again, you really should be warming up no matter what you're doing, but it's definitely a good idea to work your way up in weights with those hamstrings. If anyone has pulled their hamstring before, you know what I'm talking about. You want to make sure those things are warm, and you want to make sure you're not absolutely annihilating them every time. Things like Romanian deadlifts are really good, or regular deadlifts. So that's the second time I've mentioned deadlifts now. Doing leg curls, which is literally just bending the knee with weight. Doing good mornings, which is essentially an RDL, but with the bar or with a barbell on your back instead of hanging down. Again, if we're training our hamstrings and we're doing things like RDLs, we're not necessarily looking to build our grip strength. So kind of hook-handing it, or even using straps, which actually I will post a video later this week of how to use straps. I actually will post the video of how to use straps because I'm getting a look from my producer right now. I will make a video of how to use those, and it is a really good way of getting tension out of your hands so you don't have to worry about grip strength anymore. You'll definitely just want to make sure that when you use straps, by the way, it transfers a lot of the tension into your back, your upper back, so you want to make sure that we're keeping everything nice and tight when we're using those. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. All of those things are going to be really good with your hamstrings, and they help with your glutes a lot. Speaking of glutes, we're going to talk about our gluteal group now. So we have our quadriceps and our hamstrings. That's the front and the back of the legs, respectively. But what about that booty? That's what we're talking about next. It's honestly my favorite muscle group, not just in terms of me being a typical guy, but it's one of my favorite groups to train because it's considered the powerhouse of your body. It is involved in almost every single thing that you do, specifically with your lower body, but also some things with your upper body or anything involving power generation. So anytime you have to generate a lot of force, your glutes are going to be involved. I don't know about you, but I like being a powerful, strong person. So naturally, I would really like to train gluteals. They're my favorite group. You have 3. I think everyone has heard of the gluteus maximus. All jokes aside for that, that is the largest muscle in your body. There's the answer in case you were wondering. Your gluteus maximus is the largest, thickest muscle in your body. It is involved in basically everything. You also have your gluteus medius and your minimus. And we'll talk about those a little bit because they have more functions than just what we're going to be talking about. The primary function of the glutes are hip extension, so shoving that butt forward. We're trying to extend those hips, and hip abduction as well, so pulling things in is going to help out. Squats, deadlifts, power cleans, lunges, glute bridges. All 5 of those things I just listed are all dealing with force generation. You need it in the squat because you need to extend those hips. Literally, you're going down. It's just a big hip extension. Deadlifts is also a really big hip extension, and you have to help generate that force, and you have to squeeze everything really tight. By the way, 3rd time I'm mentioning deadlifts. I think 2nd time I'm mentioning squats here. Going back to those spinal erectors, Squats and deadlifts are the two biggest ways to make your spinal erectors stronger. Just as a quick aside, talking about squats and deadlifts, power cleans is a very big force generation movement. You're picking a bar up off the ground and you basically have to throw your hips forward so hard that you can catch the bar up by your shoulders, or thinking about like a barbell snatch as well over the head. A little bit more involved with everything in that movement. Lunges, in the bottom part, you have to basically slow yourself down and pop yourself up, which, by the way, is why your butt gets so sore doing things like lunges and step-ups, because you have to generate that force and you have to fight that down movement. And that down movement, or eccentric, is I believe the number is about 3 times stronger in that down motion of a muscle than you are in that up part. But it also causes a lot more muscle tearing, or micro tearing, which is how your muscles, they repair those, and that's how you get stronger. It also causes a lot more of that when we're moving in that down. And then glute bridges, or hip extensions, which basically are your legs extended and you have a hip extension, or are your legs bent in and your feet close to your butt, which is a glute bridge. Both are really good for hitting those glutes. Related to the glutes, we have our hip abductors, and by the way, I misspoke. That's moving the leg out, which your gluteals are also involved in, and there's another muscle called your tensor fasciae latae, and not like the drink, as much as that sounds delicious right about now, and that's involved in moving that out. You can do things like the side leg lifts and things like that to be able to train those. Moving on after that, we have our hip adductors. So we have abduction, and then we have adduction. And your hip adductors are also a fairly strong muscle group. They're located in your inner thighs. So if your inner thighs, not your fronts or backs, but like the inner thighs are ever really sore, your hip adductors, ADD, is responsible for that. You have 3 muscles in your inner thighs. You have your brevis, your longus, and your magnus, and they're responsible for some external rotation, some adduction, some hip extension and flexion. These are hit if you were doing lots of squats. They're hit to an extent with deadlifts, but coming deep out of that hole, they are hit really hard. I'm not going to get too deep into the squat mechanics. That's basically an episode all by itself. But just know when you're coming up out of that very bottom part of that squat, I'm talking below parallel, they have to do a lot of work in order to get yourself back up. A squat is a very, very compound movement, just in case you didn't know. The last ones we have are our hip flexors. A lot of people think that we just have like one hip flexor on each side. We have a lot of them. It's an entire group of muscles. A lot of people know as like the psoas, which are typically really tight. You really don't need to train your hip flexors a lot of times, especially with everyone sitting these days. Our hip flexors are really short, so training them is just going to make them more short, which is going to lead to more complicated problems with our hips. The best thing you can do, honestly, is to start stretching them, especially if you have a desk job, and get up and walk around at least 3 to 5 times a day for the 10 or 15 minutes at a time. So like take a little walking break. Take care of those hip flexors. They will help out a lot. We do have our calves, which, long story short, you have a lot of people have 2 or 3 muscles in their calves. About 10% of the population doesn't have one of them. You have your gastrocnemius and your soleus, and they're related to coming up on your tippy toes or extending your foot. So basically moving that foot back and forth. So pointing or flexing your foot. So here or here, that's what your calves are responsible for. And, bouncing up and down, that's where a lot of the load is taken. So if you ever want to train those, things like calf raises, and you can hit different parts of it by going toe in, toe out, toes neutral. That's actually how The Rock trains it. He doesn't usually use weight. So we are coming up really close. I'm going to jump into the thread and read some comments real quick. Let's see what people have been saying. Heidi is saying, LOL, don't forget the butt. Could never forget the butt. Like I said, it's my favorite. Keratin, in regards to the grip, is saying that's the best advice you've given me about holding on to things. So much tension in my hands until I did the hook method. So again, if you're feeling a ton of tension in your hands, let's work on that. Or if you feel like your hands are getting really, really tired or really, really sore, A lot of cases, it's not actually because you have baby hands, it's just because we need to work on grip strength. Doing things like hanging off of a bar is going to be really good for that grip strength. Heidi was laughing. I'm sure it was at one of my terrible, terrible jokes that I made at some point. If no one has anything else, I believe that's going to wrap this show up. It's another episode I can't believe is already 30 minutes in. If you have any questions, make sure you sling them over to me. If you're worried about it being out, if you have a private question for me, feel free to shoot me a message. I will respond to you as quickly as possible. Again, if you want to listen to this, you can find me on ipmnation.com/counterpunch. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/TheDerekNoel or Instagram at TheDerekNoel, or you can find me on the YouTube link, which will be edited in the description on this video. And remember that you are in full control of what your body can do. So please make sure that whatever you're doing, you have good form in, and start thinking about how are those muscles actually working. Am I targeting this muscle how I should? And if not, feel free to reach out to a coach. We are here to help you. We're not here to just count your reps and tell you're doing a fantastic job no matter what. We want to make sure that you're getting the most effective workout possible. So please, if you feel like you're struggling with anything, please reach out to your coach. Reach out to me if I'm not currently your coach, and I will be glad to help you out anyways. I really don't care. I am there to help you out. I want to be able to help you, so let me know how that goes. Dina is saying, hip flexors, so many problems with them. You are not alone. You are not alone, my friend. So, that being said, thank you for tuning in to episode 13, which is How to Train the Muscles, Part 2. Make sure you go check out Part 1 if you haven't already. Have a nice night, everybody.